Okay, welcome to lecture on Europe. We'll get started on this in just a few minutes. Remember to make sure you've read the chapter before beginning your quizzes. Okay, so as we move through this chapter and as you do the readings, make sure that you understand the sub-regions within the area, the east versus west economic characteristics, and then also think about the number of countries, of course, that are present, the influence of the wars in the region as an area and population decline, economic integration, especially the euro, and then most recently the issues of debt. As you do the readings on Europe, make sure that you understand from a physical context the size. You'll notice in this slide that in terms of land area is substantially smaller than North America. Also, its latitudinal extent, that is, you can see in this slide, nearly as far south as the Southwest, nearly as far north as the major portions of the Arctic in Canada. This produces the climate range that you're going to see in the next couple of slides. And again, make sure you focus on the Mediterranean climate. It's very important to the agriculture and, by extension, the culture of the region. As you look at the physical geography and also the physiography of Europe, make sure that you note where the major alpine systems are. Most notably, of course, are the Alps and Apennines associated with Italy, and the Pyrenees, which divide the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, from Central Europe. Again, focus on the Scandinavian Peninsula and its importance. As you look at this slide, again, the main thing that I'm going to be focusing on in the quizzes, and you should focus on your readings, are the climates associated with the south. I will ask you about the Mediterranean climate. You'll notice that it encompasses all of the northern portion of the Mediterranean Sea. Focus on the characteristics of it being very dry summer, relatively moist, cool winters. The last issue from a physical standpoint that I want you to focus on in your readings is that of the importance of the marine characteristics of Europe. As you noticed in an earlier slide, Europe has an immense coastline. But I also want you to focus on the rivers. Rivers continue to be a very, very important aspect of trade, navigation, and transportation in Europe, and much more so than we see in the United States. As we begin to look at the interaction between humans and the environment and in Europe, one of the things that I want you to get from your readings, and again, I'm not going to focus too much on it right here, but is that relationship between Eastern Europe and Western Europe and the environmental issues. It has been always, well, I shouldn't say always the case, but often the case that Eastern Europe has a much more damaged environment and that Western Europe spends a great deal more money and effort to maintain a much improved environment. Okay, as we move into population, which we've covered in all of our regions, a couple of important issues with Europe that you're going to see in the next few slides. Europe has a fairly high population, well over 500 million. It is fairly dense. That's in part because of the long history of human occupancy. It is somewhat uneven. You'll notice in this slide that that's the case. But the other major point is that its population is stable or in some cases declining. And it's important to look at what the implications of those declines are. As you do your readings, please focus on that. What are the issues associated with the changing population and changing demographics, and how does it affect the economy, the culture, and society? So in the next two slides, I'm not going to talk at them, but please look at them in terms of the various measures. I will talk briefly at the end of the third slide on the demographic transition. When we talk about the demographic transition is a model of population growth change. If you look at this, what's important is that Europe is at the end of this curve and began in the 1750s at stage one. What we see in this is the curve of birth rates and death rates, and then the black line is total population. And so often in your text, they're going to talk about this, and please take the time to look at the graph and understand its variables. One of course, the things that's very important in Europe is the complexity of language and the diversity of language. What I do want you to focus on are the major language families, not so much the individual languages. But here you can see the Romance languages in green, largely in the southern and Mediterranean Europe, the Germanic languages in Central Europe, and then the Slavic languages in the east. This is an important aspect of the overall cultural landscape. You'll notice that the map of contemporary religion, another cultural marker, has some pronounced similarities to that of language. You can see that Catholicism is largely associated with Romance languages, that Protestantism is much more associated with Germanic languages, and that the Orthodox religions are associated with the Eastern or Slavic languages. You also need to know that in general, Europe is becoming much more secular. That is, a decline in religious adherence. I put this slide in that I want you to understand some definitions here that you may or may not be familiar with. One, of course, is the Cold War and the relationship between Eastern Europe and Western Europe and the Soviet Union of the time. Also, the idea of the Iron Curtain, and in fact, the nature of the Cold War in all of this. So please make sure that you understand these definitions and are able to bring them to the quiz. With the end of the Cold War in 1989 to 1990, one of the things that was very interesting about this period is the reorientation of much of Europe. In this slide, what you see is that many of the Eastern European Warsaw Pact states, in fact, reoriented themselves towards NATO, which was, in a sense, the Western side of the Cold War. And to some degree, this has caused some tension with Russia. At this point, we'll see that in the next PowerPoint. As you begin to read about the economic geography of Europe, please make sure that you understand the concept of the Industrial Revolution. Remember that it began largely in England and then moved outward from there. Remember that it has a focus of energy, raw materials, and human labor. So if we look at the overall current geography of industry or manufacturing technologies in Europe, please note the difference between the traditional in the north and the slowly evolving in the south. Again, as you prepare for your quiz, make sure you focus on this slide and the readings associated with it. Remember that the European Union grew out of the European Economic Community, and today the European Union has a much wider mission as a result of the Maastricht Treaty regarding economic integration, a common currency, and mutual security. So as you look at the European Union and as you read about it in your text, and again, I want you to really focus on the readings on this, what you'll notice is that there are a few Western European states that are not members. Again, most notably Switzerland and Norway. And I want you to think a little bit about why that is the case. Of course, we can see other issues associated with some of the Balkan regions, and those are different reasons. But understand the relationship between these states. Okay, the last point that I want to make in this is this concept of the European Union as a single economic entity. One of the most important aspects of that, of course, is the development of the euro as a common currency, and many of you may have seen in the news over the last year the questions of whether the euro can survive if Greece and Spain default on their loans. So as you read through these areas, think about that and the stability of the Union. Okay, so again, focus on this slide, think about the major aspects in terms of how Europe as a region functions. Think about the physical context and, of course, the development of its economics in the last decade.